Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Think Future. My name's Chris Kalaboukis, and once again, we're coming at you live from deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We're talking innovation, startups, the future, not necessarily those, and not necessarily in that order. If you're watching on YouTube, smack that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when a new show comes online. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast service, please subscribe. Please drop a note on Apple Podcasts. I greatly appreciate it. So let me ask you something. Do you watch the news? On TV, scrolling through your phone, or listening on the radio? Probably a lot of you watch or listen or read the news. The news. And why do you listen and read the news? Well, probably because there's lots of reasons, right? Back when we all had water coolers, or we were at the office, and we were talking about, hey, did you hear about what happened yesterday? Oh yeah, isn't that terrible? And sometimes it's political, and sometimes it's just newsworthy, and sometimes it's this, and sometimes it's negative, and sometimes it's positive. But we all, at some point, I mean, in the past, people were a lot more into the news. That means less than some. But whenever something shocking and outrageous occurs, more than likely, it will show up in your stream and you'll get news. Have you heard the news? Oh yeah, this is happening. It's like something that connects us sometimes. And sometimes it's a surprising thing that occurs that you want to tell other people. Like there's a friend of mine who all he does is post obituaries. Oh, this guy died, or that guy died, or this guy died, or that guy died. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in that, but for him it's news. And for some people who are interested in that kind of thing, it's news, right? So if you're a startup founder, you're probably thinking to yourself, look at all this stuff that's happening in the world. Look at all this injustice. Look at all these things that are horrible happening in the world that are being posted in the news. And you know what? I'm going to build a startup to try and solve this problem that's in the news. This problem that's in the news. And you're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, it's a good idea. There's a problem that's being reported in the news. And if it's being reported in the news, then it's probably a big issue that somebody needs to deal with. But there's one thing that you forgot about the news. See, the one thing that most people forget about the news, and it's because I think that a lot of times people who are really news junkies, they just get addicted to the news and they just hear the same thing over and over and over again. They think it happens a lot. But one of the things that the nature of the news is that people forget is that the reason it's news is not because it happens all the time. If it happened all the time, if it was something that was a real problem that happened all the time, then it wouldn't be news. Why? Because the news is something that hardly ever happens. That's what makes it news. If it was something that happened all the time, then it wouldn't be news. It wouldn't be news. Because news is things that are new and surprising and different from what's happening today. If you lived in a city that had 100 murders a day, it would be news if they only had 10. You see what I'm saying? So the 100 murders a day is not news because it's normal. It's the status quo. It is what it is. I mean, from the outside, you're probably thinking to yourself, 100 murders a day, that's a horrible city. Why would I want to live there? If you don't live in that city, that's fine. But if you live in a city that has 100 murders a day, then someone coming online and saying, hey, there's been 100 murders today, that's not news. That's not news. 200 murders might be news, 10 murders might be news, 0 murders would be great news, but that's not news. So I think a lot of times when people are so addicted to the news and what's happening next, and this news source and that news source and this news source and that news source, and the stuff that they say on the news, this is a big problem, this is a big problem, this is a big problem, this is a big problem. That is an indicator, if you ask me, it's an inverse indicator as to something being a big problem. Because if it's being reported on the news, it's something that doesn't happen very often. And I think we all forget that, because a lot of times we watch the news and they repeat the same damn thing over and over and over again. You think, oh my God, this is horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible. I'm hearing it all the time. Nah. Just because the news says it. In fact, the more the news says it, the less it actually happens in real life. I mean, it's counterintuitive. But if you think about it, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because if something happened every day, if it wasn't something out of the ordinary, key point, if it was out of the ordinary, then it's notable and it needs to get mentioned, and it's news. If it's not out of the ordinary, if it's not notable, then it's not news. So if you create an amazing new product which fulfills your customers' expectations and get it out the door, and you have amazing customer service and everybody loves you, the chances of you being in the news are slim to none because it's good. That's the other piece I wanted to say. Is that one of the things about human beings is that human beings, and there have been studies on this, many studies on this, we react better. Well, we don't react better, but we react more to negativity, because back in the very, very far past, which doesn't exist anymore, we used to be fearful of anything that was changed because we thought it would be something that would be bad for us. We thought, a lion was going to track us down, or we would die, or eat some fruit that was bad, or whatever. We were afraid of things that were new and different because they might kill us or might hurt us real bad. So that's why any negative stimulus is where news goes. I mean, when you hear good news on the radio or on the TV or on your feed, it doesn't affect you as much as bad news, which is exactly why that's what they mostly report. They mostly report bad news because the bad news is the stuff that triggers your brain. It draws more attention. And what do you think they're looking for? Attention. So like I said, the news is something that hardly ever happens. So if you see something in the news and think, wow, what an injustice, or what a problem, what's something that we really, really need to solve? If it's there, it probably means it hardly ever happens, which means that it doesn't mean that you shouldn't look into it as an idea for your startup. You shouldn't be building a business around this concept. You should be using that to research and figure out, is this a real problem? Or is this something the news is just reporting? Something that's out of the ordinary, that hardly ever happens, and that doesn't really need to be dealt with. So you need to look at it with a much more critical eye. Is this a real problem? If it's a real problem, if it is a real problem, then maybe the news is the front end of the real problem and it's only going to get worse. And maybe it needs to be something that's dealt with. But a lot of times, on the surface, 99.9% of what you hear on the news, or what the news is carping about day in, day out, is out of the ordinary. It's rare. It hardly ever happens. And if you're trying to build a business to address this issue, you're probably going to fail because you won't have enough people to buy your product. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.